Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Teach Kelvin Your Thing session. I am absolutely happy about this session because I'll be learning something I have been holding on learning for quite a while. You guys are going to see it pretty soon. I have a pretty interesting guest who is known so much for being like a very good TypeScript teacher. So I'm pretty lucky. So I'm talking about Matt Pocock, and he's going to be teaching me TypeScript. Hello, Matt.
How you doing, Kelvin? You all right?
I am pretty excited to have you here, and I want to thank you for making out the time. I know you're pretty busy. You have a lot, especially with what's coming up, your course. So thank you for taking out the time.
No worries, man. I'm excited to go for it. We can cover a lot of sort of beginner TypeScript stuff in this session, and I think why don't you tell me kind of your background with TypeScript, and we can work from there.
Okay, so before we do that, I know I did introduce you, but in your own words, could you just tell us who Matt Pocock is? Like just a little bit about yourself, like background, so we all know you a bit better.
Sure. So I'm a TypeScript teacher, I guess, and before that, I worked as part of the X-State core team for 2 years, and I led TypeScript development teams and worked a lot on TypeScript over the last kind of 3, 4, 5 years. And yeah, kind of what I'm doing now is I'm releasing a course on TypeScript that will take you from total beginner to total wizard in TypeScript. Because in TypeScript, often there's kind of one sort of like wizard on the team that unblocks everybody, that makes all these cool APIs that people can try out and use. And I kind of want to add more of those to the industry. So if that sounds like you might want to do that, then maybe you should take my course. And I hope that you'll get a lot out of this session as well, because we're going to be going from scratch. So 0 TypeScript knowledge to a pretty basic or intermediate level of TypeScript. So I'm pretty excited about this, Kelvin.
Awesome. I like the from 0 to wizard. That sounds interesting. Yeah, so thank you for that brilliant intro. So back to your question about my knowledge of TypeScript. I could say I have never used TypeScript in production before, and I write a lot of JavaScript. So that's who you have. I've heard about TypeScript. I've never deployed TypeScript or tried to use it in my code base day to day. Yeah.
Cool. Well, why don't we start with the big question, which is like, what is TypeScript, first of all? So why don't we jump to my screen and I can sort of show you what's going on.
Sure.
So inside this repository, I'm inside VS Code, and Kelvin's here too, actually.
Kelvin's here.
What we do is, we've got a bit of live share going on. I can like change this file, for instance, to a JavaScript file from a TypeScript file. And inside here, what you'll see is it kind of just looks like normal JavaScript, TypeScript is just like a set of features on top of JavaScript that allow you to do different stuff. So what we're going to do, first of all, like we can just create like a function. We can say, let's say myfunc, so const myfunc equals, we're going to use this arrow function. And we're going to say, let's say we've got add 2 numbers here. So we're going to have an A and a B, and we'll return A plus B. So this feels pretty familiar, right? This is just normal JavaScript-y stuff. You can imagine writing any old stuff in here. Now, we're going to turn this into a TypeScript file by saying index.ts instead of index.js. Now, I can do that because I've got some packages installed in my package.json. I've got TypeScript here, and I've also got a tsconfig here. What I did to get this going is I just run, my terminal's gone funky, there we go, is I just ran tsc init like this. And that just gives you a tsconfig that lets TypeScript know kind of what you want to do. So here then, we've got these two add 2 numbers here. And in fact, I'm just going to restart my TS server just because something's not going quite right. And we've suddenly got these little red lines coming from our IDE. And it says parameter A implicitly has an any type. So Kelvin, have you seen this error before? Like, do you know what this is?
No, not at all.
Yeah. This is a tasty error. Like, why would TypeScript be just erroring here on what looks like valid JavaScript? Well, the reason TypeScript exists is to make your code more robust. And the way it does that is it demands that you give annotations to certain bits of your JavaScript. So this horrible looking error, parameter A implicitly has an any type. What that means is that we haven't given this a type annotation. And so what we can do to fix this error is we can say a colon number here. Kelvin, you still with me? Your video has disappeared.
Yeah, definitely much with you.
Okay, cool. I was worried you'd vanished for a second there.
Oh,
Please
no, I'm there.
Stay on the line, man. I need you.
Yes, man.
So we've got this B then. So could you do the same annotation for B? So your cursor is just there.
So I'm annotating B to be number as well?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Because we're just adding two numbers together, right?
Yeah.
So now when we call this here, we can add two numbers. And if we pass 1 and 2 here, then that's going to work fine. Like nothing's going to error here. And we get something back from here, which is const, let's say results equals add two numbers. It knows that a number was passed in and another number was passed in. And so it will return A plus B here. And the result, we can actually have a look at the result by in our IDE hovering over this. And we can see that result is a number, which is really cool. So you can do that yourself, by the way, just hover over that result number. Now that's really, really nice. We can see that our IDE is already getting a bit more powerful because if we have it in JavaScript, like if we were to change this to a JS file, first of all, we're going to get some funky errors because we can't annotate this. But this result here would be typed as any. That means that like result dot, like we can't, there's no autocomplete on this result. We can't like look at any functions that come off that. Whereas if we have index.ts, then suddenly what you get is, first of all, go back to number and number again. And then all of a sudden, because it knows it's a number, then you get all of the primitives that are built into number built in. So to exponential, to fixed, for instance. So const result stringified equals result.toFixed. So toFixed actually turns a number into a string.
Yeah.
Does that make sense so far? And we can actually see that that's a string because it's typed as a string here, just by hovering over it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. So what happens if we try to call add two numbers with something that isn't a number? Well, what we're going to get is const second results. We can say add two numbers. Let's add the stringified result as we had before, and let's add another number here. So something's going on there, which is argument of type string is not assignable to parameter of type number. Kelvin, what does this mean?
Well, it means we're trying to give a string argument, but we define that the A is going to be a number.
Exactly. Yes. So this idea of like assignability, something is not assignable to something else, is really crucial to understanding how the TypeScript compiler works. Because if you're trying to pass in, you can think of it like slots. Like imagine if you have like that sort of little wooden board and you've got a little square slot, you've got a triangle slot, and you've got a circle slot. TypeScript can check like if the circle can fit into the square, you know, and we're trying to pass like a triangle into a square, you know, it's just not going to fit. So the idea of something being assignable is kind of like it's just not, doesn't go in that slot. That makes sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Nice. And so for this, we would have to like, I don't know, wrap it in pass int or something, and then pass int, it actually returns a number. And you can hover over any of the built-in JavaScript functions to see what they return. So here I'm hovering over pass int, and pass int, you can see it takes in a string as its first argument, also takes in a radix, like which can either be number or undefined, and it returns a number. And because TypeScript knows that pass int returns a number, then it's fine to have it pass in to this function here. So you can see how TypeScript just like makes everything sound. It makes everything solid and connects everything up. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, it does. Completely.
Nice. Any questions so far on this?
No. So just more of an observation. I think, you know, I have run into issues where you are passing the wrong type to a function, and I'm seeing that TypeScript is pretty much going to catch that as you code. And that makes sense. I like it.
Yeah, it's pretty beautiful.
Yeah.
You can think of TypeScript as kind of like a teacher that's hovering over you while you do your work. Like if you forget to do this pass in, for instance, and you have this stringified result, then your teacher is going to come in and mark a little red line on your work.
Yep.
And this is kind of like what a lot of people's emotional response to TypeScript is. It's kind of like, oh, I don't want my teacher watching me. I just want to be able to code my thing. I just want to do my JavaScript. But actually, like, this teacher is really, really useful because not only does it give you kind of like ways to improve your code, but it also kind of like gives you hints on what things might be. It gives you autocomplete on numbers, autocomplete on strings, autocomplete on anything in your code base. And so it superpowers your IDE. So even though your teacher is kind of like watching you and doing scary things, they really do want to help you.
Yeah.
If you ever want to kind of like put your work in like to your teacher to like submit it for a grade, if you want to check if your code passes, then you can actually run yarn TSC, and so you can do that and run that, and it will look at your entire code base and it will check if everything passes TypeScript. So this is really, really useful if you want to check what's going on a CI, for instance. So you can run yarn TSC, and then like you get sort of complete errors on your code base to check if something works. So your teacher gives you a grade at the end of it. And the grade is either fail or pass. So here we're failing because we need to wrap this in pass int again. And if I run that again, then in fact, I can even run it with a -- watch flag. And -- watch is going to like continually give me feedback about whether my code passes or not. That makes sense?
Yeah, totally.
Nice. So, okay. So where do we go from here? Let's try and build something with TypeScript. We're going to build like a little, a kind of database thing.
Okay.
Now imagine that you have a database, or imagine you're doing a lot of work on the front end and you're trying to code something up and like get something working.
Okay.
Imagine that you have like concept of like a CMS that we're building. So in our CMS, we're going to need like users, we're going to need posts, and maybe let's just start with that. And when you're building like a database in the back end, you think about the tables, right? You think about the columns that are going into those tables. Have you done much back end work before? Is that kind of familiar as a concept?
A lot. I'm sort of full stack-ish.
Nice.
Yeah.
Tasty. Yeah. Then this feels very, very familiar to you. And TypeScript, kind of in traditional databases, you have like column types like string. You have I don't know, Boolean, different types of numbers. In TypeScript, you kind of have string, Boolean, number. You have a few others as well. And you declare these tables through interfaces. So imagine we have a user here. We're going to say it has an ID of number. Let's say is admin, which is going to be Boolean. And then, I don't know, what else could we have? Like age, number.
Yeah, maybe name.
Yeah, name string.
Yeah.
Exactly. So here then, and in fact, let's do the proper thing you're supposed to do with databases, which is first name and last name.
Yeah.
And now here we can how familiar is this syntax to you? This looks kind of alien for someone who's never looked at JavaScript before, or who has only experience of JavaScript.
Yeah, it is the interface keyword. It's like this is foreign. This is new.
Yep, definitely. And the interface keyword is something that's special to TypeScript. Now, what's going to happen with the interface keyword is, in fact, I'll tell you that in a minute. We can use the interface keyword as a kind of contract in our system so that we can say that the things that we're passing around our system must meet that contract. So if we say const get user, or let's say make user, actually, this is going to be a function. And just like the function we had before, we're actually going to add something different here, which is we're going to say that the return type of this function, what this function returns, it must match a user contract. So the way we can do that is we add a colon and we say user just there. Now we got another error. Our teacher has annoyed at us again. What have we got? A function whose declared type is neither void nor any must return a value.
Mm.
Kelvin, what does this mean?
Well, it means that we're saying this function make user is returning a user, but we're not returning anything as of this time.
Bam. Yeah, it must return a value because the return type is not void, and void means nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So we could say returns void, and then if we returned a number or returned blah 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 blah, then it would error because it's not returning void. Type string doesn't fit into the void slot.
Mm-hmm.
But we're saying it should return user, so we've got to return a value of some kind.
Okay.
So let's return an object, and suddenly, if you press, I'm on a Mac, but I think you can do this on PC too. You can press Control Space when you're inside that object, and you will get magically
Wow.
all of the autocomplete you'll ever need inside that thing. And
Yes.
it knows that it must return a user. And so we're getting like property user.age, which is a number. Hovering over each of these is going to tell us what type we need to match that contract, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So age 31, let's say first name Matt. Is admin, yeah, let's say I'm an admin. ID 1, last name Pocock. And there we go. Because we've now matched all that, then the error goes away. Our teacher is happy with us. So I can just remove that. And you'll see that in the watch command I ran earlier, we're getting this error. Property last name is missing in type blah, 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 blah. And again, our teacher is watching over us, making sure we're all okay. We learned some new stuff here. We've got return type annotations,
Yeah.
which you can add, you don't have to, and interfaces.
Oh.
Any questions on this so far, Kelvin?
No, but I think with the interface keyword, we're sort of making, should I call them user-defined types? And we could now say variables or return values can be of that type. That makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this, by the way, is only works. It only works at the type level. This
Okay.
doesn't add anything extra to your bundle size. Let's actually have a look at that. Now, our English teacher can not only kind of watch over our work, it can also like publish it to little student newsletters or something. You know, the metaphor is kind of straining at that point.
Yep.
But what TypeScript can do is it can take your TypeScript code here and it can turn it into JavaScript code. Now, you won't use this on every project that you use. There are different types of bundlers for bundling TypeScript into JavaScript, some of which are actually faster than TypeScript itself, like ESBuild or SWC or things like that. But the fact that TypeScript can do this is pretty cool. So you can say yarn tsc, and what that's going to do is I removed the no emit flag. And what I ended up with is I actually ended up with some JavaScript files. And these JavaScript files, I've got this index.js here, which is there's some sort of scary stuff in there. But inside here, we've got a make user function, including the comments that we had before, with a little use strict at the top. And this just has our make user function. And if we look at these side by side, db.ts, you can see that the only code that was retained was the stuff without the type annotations. So the interface disappeared. The return type annotation disappeared. What that means is TypeScript gives you confidence that your code is working at the type level, but it doesn't add anything to your runtime bundle. So you can still TypeScript doesn't give you perfect assurances that your code will be this shape at runtime. But it does mean that when you're checking it in your code base and your teacher is looking at it, it will understand that it looks okay. So does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So like in our compare function before as well, it's not like it's going it's not adding anything to your code where it's saying if type of a not equal number, throw new error or something like that. It's not actually giving you stuff at runtime. It's just checking it at the type level, which is still insanely useful. I think it's an amazing trade-off because what it means is you get to have all of this safety without adding anything extra to your bundle size, which is, I think, incredible. If you can turn off bundling by going into tsconfig.json and just adding no emits true. There we go. Thank you, GitHub Copilot, which is what I'm using for these code suggestions.
Nice.
Okay, so looking good. So we need to add a post as well. So Kelvin, why don't you give us a post for me? Copy that interface syntax and go for a post. I'm going to sip my coffee.
All right. So, copying my teacher. So definitely post should have an ID, make it a number. And so post gonna have a title, string, probably just give it body, keep it short and simple. With the string.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Sounds good to me. Nice.
Yeah.
You can see that there, I notice you've added a little comma there. That's like not quite the right syntax, but TypeScript will understand it and pass it. And I'm actually just going to save my end because I've got Prettier installed, and that will just change it into semicolons there. Prettier is pretty great. So now we've got our post. Let's now say that a user has to come with an array of posts. So we've got this, we can say posts here, and we can actually reuse interfaces inside other interfaces. So we can say posts is going to be an array of posts. So we say post, and then we just add this little syntax at the end to say this is an array. So post array. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
That means this is erroring at us. What does this error mean?
Yeah, so we've modified the user interface. So that means the current value we're giving it in the make user function wouldn't pass because we have like a post property needed, which is an array of posts.
Exactly. So here we can pass an empty array, and that will be valid. But let's, for adventurousness sake, we can say posts here. We can say ID1, body, blah, 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 and title, great post. And there we go. Now TypeScript is happy again because we've satisfied this contract. Cool. So this is kind of like the basics of TypeScript. Actually, let's add one more thing to our user type, which is we're going to say, like, isAdmin is a little bit like, that might not be the thing. Like, there might be multiple roles within the system. It's probably not a very good database practice to say, like there's only admin and non-admins. So what we might need to do is have a concept of like a role where you can either be in the user role, in the admin role, and the super admin role. In a database terminology, what would you call that?
Okay. Can you go about it again?
Yeah, it's like a you want the value, so like role here, it's going to be a set of members, right? It's going to be either one thing or another thing or another thing. And it's not going to be any value, like we can't pass in like any string there. It's only going to be one of those set values.
Now I get it. So we're talking about something like an enum here?
Like an enum, exactly. So TypeScript has a built-in idea of an enum, where you can say enum role, for instance, is going to be like user, admin, and super admin, like this. I don't usually like to teach this. I actually like to teach something different. So I want you to say, oh, okay, role is cool, but or enums are cool. You can have a look at them in the TypeScript database, but I'm going to teach this a different way, which is we're going to actually declare a new type. Type is going to be called role. And role is going to be a literal string, so it can be admin, or let's say start with user. And we're going to add a new character here, which is going to be this or character. And we can say user or admin or super admin. So now we've got there's like a whole lot of new stuff happening here. So let me talk through it piece by piece. This type thing here lets me declare anything as a type. So interfaces can mostly only be used for objects or things that sort of look like objects, like classes. This type here can be used to express anything. So I can say type wow equals an object with like a with another object inside it. We can express an array. So like if we had posts here, for example, it could be like post array. And Right. So this type can literally be, it can express anything you like in TypeScript whatsoever. Now, this thing here says we can actually use literal strings inside our TypeScript. So we can say, I want exactly the string user here. So for instance, if we had like type fruit, we would have apple or banana or, I don't know, coconuts. You get the idea.
Yeah.
And if we wanted to say like const is valid fruit, then we would say fruit is a fruit here. And now we can only pass in is valid fruit with apple, banana, or coconut. And we even get autocomplete on those different elements as well, which is pretty amazing.
Nice.
So this lets us specify kind of like literal values inside our TypeScript code bases. Now this here, this represents an OR character.
Okay.
And this creates what we call a union type. This role is going to be a union of possibilities. It's going to, like, TypeScript can almost look into the future and like tell you like all of these different paths based on if it's a user, admin, or super admin. It's incredibly cool. And so this role could represent any one of those values. And you can pass in admin to meet the contract, and you can pass in super admin. So if I do that, if I say const role, and I'm going to add an annotation here is a role, then I can say, if I just pass in a random string, then what does this type error mean here?
Yeah, let's say the literal string is not as assignable to the type role. Yeah, the string you passed in. Yeah.
Yeah, the crazy string I passed in. Whereas if I pass in admin or super admin or user, it's going to work. So it's such an amazing little piece of tech, this, because it allows you to really express a lot of different possibilities in your code. And what I can do now is I can just say user role is a role here. So we've got an error here. What's this error doing?
Yeah, so the isAdmin property is no longer in the user interface. So yeah, it's just telling us that.
Exactly. So object literal may only specify known properties, and isAdmin does not exist in type user. So isAdmin just doesn't exist for us. So we need to get rid of it. Okay. Wow, now it's a big error. Okay. Property role is missing. So what does this mean?
Yeah, it means we've not given a role. Like, though the user type has a role, we've not passed that in here.
Exactly. Yeah. It's really interesting the way TypeScript works, because it doesn't give you like all of the errors at once. Sometimes it just tells you almost the first thing it sees that's wrong with the situation. It doesn't say, okay, it doesn't like give you a list. It doesn't say you need to sort out isAdmin and you need to sort out role. It just says, first of all, sort out isAdmin. Okay, I'll do that first. Then it says add a role to this, and role can be admin, super admin, or user. If I get this wrong again, then it's going to give me an error close at hand, which is the same as the error we had before. So, does that make sense so far?
Yeah, it does make sense.
Nice. Okay, so from here then, we've got the kind of basics down. We've got a sense of interface, we've got types, we've had a look at little union types here too. We've had a look at interfaces with users. You can reuse interfaces inside other interfaces. And then we've also looked at function return types as well. So what kind of things so have you got any sort of broader questions about TypeScript in general at this point? How's it feeling for you?
Yeah, so at this point, it's looking good. I think I catch the gist. It tends to work with, it's similar to other typed languages I've worked with, maybe Dart or Swift. So I get that on that level. So I think broadly it's good. And I also like the fact that it compiles down to JavaScript. So, and the code looks like JavaScript, except with the TypeScript annotation stripped out. So
exactly. Yeah. If we run this again and we have a look at the fresh JavaScript it's given us, or in fact, I've messed that up because I've got no emit inside here. So I'll just comment that out. So if I run yarn tsc, then we're going to get db.js back. And again, it's just stripped out all of our type annotations. and we're just returning the simple JavaScript here.
Yeah. Okay. So I am actually kind of understanding it as more of a really efficient tool needed for development because it doesn't affect the JavaScript we ship. It just makes you write less buggy code because it will catch things like typo or assigning wrong values and stuff like that.
Yep, exactly. So why don't we look at let's look at some more complicated stuff here. I'm kind of
Okay.
like thinking, have I like missed anything out here, first of all, before we go into this complicated stuff?
Yeah.
I
And
feel like this.
okay.
Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, so I have this question. It's more of like a newbie question. So you mentioned we could use type to define what we could use interface to define currently as we see. So I'm wondering when should I use which because of the two options.
Yep, totally. You can like TypeScript suggests that you should use interface where you can. So in the documentation, it says you should use interface wherever possible. The reason for that is it's supposed to perform a little bit faster. I've actually like checked this recently, and it doesn't seem to perform much faster for me. And so you can, if you want to, use type everywhere, and that will keep things consistent throughout your code base. But basically, as long as you're consistent in your usage, then you can use either interface or type. It just depends. So I'm using them interchangeably here just to show you the options. I personally quite like interface. It performs a little bit better in some error messages. So you'll get like the error message of post, like sort of like spelled out for you. Whereas I don't know, but it's pretty like you can use either one and it's going to be fine, really.
Okay, so with the type rule, can I turn that to interface rule? Is that going to work?
No, because interfaces can mostly only represent objects.
Oh, okay.
So because this isn't an object, and interfaces also can't represent like union types as well. So I can't have like or something else here. It's just going to yell at me. So interface is literally only for specifying some objects, really.
Got you. That makes sense.
Any more newbie questions? Like newbie questions are brilliant. Give me more of them.
Yeah, and none at this time. Everything looks good. And okay, so I see a convention where you're defining the interface and the type with uppercase, the first letter.
Yeah.
But in TypeScript, the given types are lower cases, like the number and the string. Is that convention?
Yeah. So like number in itself is like a reserve keyword in TypeScript. I have a feeling if you try and do like number something inside here, I know that will work. Maybe it's not a reserve keyword. But yeah, the convention is when you're naming types, you use Pascal case. So kind of uppercase, camel case, basically. And with kind of properties of them, you can use whatever case you want. So you can use first name if you like. You can even have like illegal stuff in here if you want to say like first name, which is kind of cool. So yeah, you can kind of do whatever you like inside here. I like to have them, so if we were to rename post to like post, this would still work if we change this here. But I've been writing it that way for so long that this sort of just feels funny to me. You know, like it's nice having these in Pascal case for me.
Nice, that's fine.
And VS Code helps you here because it gives you kind of syntax highlighting, so you can see what's a type and what's not. So green things are types in general, yellow things are functions, orange things are strings.
Nice.
Okay, let's start ramping up things a little bit. You can use TypeScript to really help you out when you're using third-party libraries. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, we're going to build like a little Express server here. I'm going to say app.ts. So you've used Express before?
Yes, a little bit.
A little bit, cool. It's a really cool library. What it lets you do is build out a backend function. So I'm going to import Express from Express. And, ooh, that's interesting. We've got an error here. Could not find a declaration file for module Express. Kelvin, what is this error about?
If I have to guess,
Hmm.
it's checking if such a module exists in our file system, but it couldn't find any.
Yeah.
Is that
Well,
the right
let's
guess?
see that. So let's go hunting inside our node modules to see if Express is actually there. So we've got node modules, Express.
Oh,
I mean,
it is there.
Express seems to be there. So
Yeah.
why on earth would it be doing that? It would give us the same error if we said like, which is kind of confusing. Cannot find module blah, blah, blah. Or it actually gives us, no, it does say, it just says it could not find a declaration file
Oh,
for it.
yeah, a declaration
That's
file.
interesting. So what's a declaration file? Well,
Mhm.
a declaration file is basically a file in which you have, it's what's called a .d.ts file. And there should be some, like in Cookie, maybe it has some, or maybe it doesn't actually. Yeah, we have some for like types node. So we have some for like the built-ins of node here, which I actually installed by installing types node. So if you're working in the backend with TypeScript, you should probably have this package installed. This
Mhm.
gives us like type definitions, and they're quite scary actually, for like console logging, for instance. So like console.log. So there's a few other sort of like powerful node APIs for like deer and stuff. And you really don't need to look at these yourself or even edit them if you're at the beginner level. But what we do need to do then is we need to have declaration files for the module Express. And it says here, try npmi save dev types express if it exists. So I'm going to, because I'm using yarn, I'm going to say yarn add b, and this adds it to the dev dependencies types express. And okay, it found something and it added a bunch of other stuff, and now the error has gone away.
Nice.
What? Okay, that's cool, but I kind of need to understand that a bit better.
Mhm.
So what's happened there is Express is a JavaScript library that's actually built in JavaScript. It doesn't use TypeScript at all in its code base. So it doesn't ship TypeScript to the wire at all. All it does is it's built in JavaScript and it just gives you JavaScript. So that's a problem because in TypeScript, if we were to use a different TypeScript library that is built in TypeScript, so I'm going to add Zod, which is an amazing library that I'll get to in a minute, but we can just import from Zod like this, and it's not giving us that error, and it tells us exactly what's inside Zod. So we get autocomplete on all of the module members of Zod, which is
Mhm.
fantastic. But Express doesn't have that because it isn't built in TypeScript. So what's happened is, to fix that problem, a huge community of users have come together and created the definitely typed repo. What that does is it provides third-party declaration files for different modules. So inside Node Modules types Express here, it's actually got a whole bunch of these .d.ts files. And like core.express, blah, 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 and this, it's amazing because it just allows you type safe access to the Express package without Express itself needing to be built in TypeScript.
Nice.
So the same is true for like React does this, and a few other big libraries do it as well. Does that make sense, kind of what's going on there?
Yeah, sure. So, with that um explanation, so I have more insight into the first error it was giving us. So, since we're in a TypeScript project, it's expecting a TypeScript module, but we
Mm-hmm.
gave it a JavaScript module. So, to compensate for that, it needs a .d.ts file.
Exactly. If I
Mhm.
then delete this again, we're going to get that error again.
Mhm.
If I just, by the way, one thing you can do, oh, there we go, it caught up, is it couldn't find the declaration file because I deleted types express. And so if I add it again, then it should get happy. There we go.
Nice.
So, okay, now we can see that I know the API for express is const app equals express. And this returns, you can see that when you hover over it, it's a function that returns something called express. So app here, what can I do inside app? Well, I get autocomplete on the entire library. And I can say app.get, let's say I want to get like the index page for my application. Then I know that I can say inside here, I can pass rec res, and we can see that this is typed to a request here. So res here is typed to a response. Now, if I were to do this without TypeScript's help, I would be guessing on all of these APIs. And I can see that rec.body is typed as request.body, and this is typed as like as something called any. Like there's just all of these methods here. It's just absolutely amazing. So rec.path, rec.pause. And what this means is that I still need to look at the docs to sort of understand kind of what I'm doing, but I get so much more help in my IDE than if I was just working on this on my own in JavaScript. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Like I'm seeing a whole lot of benefits for it, because if we don't get much of these autocompletes in JavaScript, so you have to like guess sometimes what the properties are in an object, or you go to the docs, which is a round trip, and you're distracted. It would be better to get them in your IDE or editor. It's nice.
Here, for instance, if I send a string instead of a number to status, it's going to tell me and warn me. Absolutely wonderful. So here then, let me think. So we can say like app.listen, and let's say 3000 here. Now, what we can do then, or in fact, let me put this on 4000. And I'm going to add hello world to this. So you can run your TypeScript like this. Like if you're working, if you're working in the front end, and let's say you're building like a, have you used React before? Like you know about Next and stuff?
I have used Vue and Next, and I know a bit of React.
Cool. Yeah. Well, the same is true in Vue, the same is true in Svelte, the same is true in React, and all the big frameworks. Often TypeScript can be built in, like in your process. So you can just say like, when I set up my app, I want to add TypeScript to it. And they often even have CLIs for like changing your app into a TypeScript app as well. So a lot of these big frameworks have gone all in on TypeScript. And what that means is that you usually don't have to care about your TS config or anything like that, like all of this setup here. So when we're working in the backend, kind of what we need to be able to do is to run our code locally and to check that it's working. And the quickest way to do that is actually by using something called ESBuild. ESBuild is like it's a method for transforming TypeScript into JavaScript that's really, really, really fast. And the way it works is you basically say, it doesn't do any of like the teacher stuff. It doesn't check your work at all, but it just strips out the annotations, turns it into valid JavaScript, and then you're good to go. And what that can then do is we can use Node to then take that information and just run it for us, which is really, really nice. For some reason, it's taking a little bit of trouble with my network connection, eh? Here we go. Nice. So what we're going to do then is we're going to just go into package.json. We've got ESBuild register. We're going to add a script inside here, and this is going to be start, and we're going to say node -r ESBuild register, and then what we can do is just target source db.ts. What that's going to do is it's going to call node. It's going to register something called ESBuild register. What that does is it just basically registers ESBuild as part of the node running. And then we're going to target a specific file and run it. And it's not DB that we want, it's actually app, because that's where our Express app lives. So in theory, this code is going to run, and we're going to get a running app that's just going to say hello world on port 4000. I'm going to add a little callback in here, which is going to say console log hello from port 4000. Not 400, 4000. There we go. So I clear all this. The yarn starts. Now, hello from port 4000. So let's check port 4000 and let's see if it's open. And we've got our hello world.
Nice.
Super cool. So this is a way that you can just get started, and you notice how quick that was to kick off and start as well. It's like instant. It just opens it up on port 4000. And what we can do is we can say 4000, and we'll just say hello Kelvin instead. This doesn't do hot reloading, but you can get it to do hot reloading. In fact, no, you can't do hot reloading with this approach. but we just can say hello Kelvin just by restarting the server and refreshing the page.
Right.
But that gives us a sense of how we can take that code and just immediately start seeing what it's up to and working a bit more in TypeScript in the backend.
Nice.
So any questions with that?
That's fine. So instead of you having to compile to JavaScript first and run it later on using the ES-build and ES-dash register module, we could get that quickly. So that makes sense.
Super, super nice. And it's
Nice.
incredibly quick.
Yeah, I like it.
So, all right. So then I guess we should start talking about like why TypeScript? Why would you use it? Because there's a lot of kind of like TypeScript skeptics out there. TypeScript is one of like the most, people vote on it often as like one of the most satisfying, desirable languages to use and to learn. But there's a lot of people out there who just love sticking with JavaScript. And so I'd love to hear your take on that, because I think you're one of the skeptics, right?
Yeah, definitely. My big red flag is, oh no, what is .ts? I don't want to change my JS extension. I like my JavaScript. I don't want to trade that for anything. Another thing, the tooling. I'm skeptical about adding another layer of complexity in terms of tooling. So in the perfect world, I would love JavaScript to have types if it gives me my .js. I love type languages. They are cool. So that's why I'm skeptical about types. Why I haven't used it all these years. It's been out. Like there has been some serious question. I wrote an open source package like a month ago, and the next thing was, can we have a scaffold for TypeScript? I said, oh no.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's really popular, I know, and company trust it because of it's really catch most of the errors that you would get when you're coding. Yeah. So that's why I'm skeptical. The extension, tooling, is this worth it? And I see it more of like a developer tool, a DX tool for the developer than an actual language per se. I might be wrong, but that's my perception of it.
Yeah, let me take that first. Like the idea of it just being a language, or like it doesn't feel like a new language to me. Like especially in recent years, TypeScript has decided to get closer and closer to JavaScript, to never implement anything that isn't inside JavaScript. There are some bits of TypeScript syntax that are special to TypeScript, but I think they sort of regret it now. Like you can take a type or like const. What's a good way of thinking about this? Imagine we have a const myfunc over here, which can take in either string or str. It's going to be string or undefined here. Like string here, so const long string, for instance, is, let's imagine that we have this string here. It's going to be string or undefined, but there's a syntax you can use where you just say like boom, like this, which is like a little exclamation point. And this removes the undefined from the union, so it forces it to be a string. And I think if TypeScript were around today, they wouldn't have added this because it's something that JavaScript just doesn't have, you know. So I think, and things like enums, for instance, they don't necessarily like recommend those anymore because an enum, so enum, my enum, A, B, C, whatever, whoops. This is something that JavaScript like doesn't have at all, and it actually does add something to the code. So this adds like an object that sort of has A, B, and C as members of that object. And so it's sort of like, I don't know, it's just not very comfortable for TypeScript. And I think TypeScript now is just saying all we want to be is just a set of little annotations on top of JavaScript, which is super nice. And that means it's pretty light as well. But you're right, there's like it does add like a new layer on top of standard JavaScript. You can't just ship TypeScript to the browser and expect it to work all the time. But the thing is, though, that we're not doing that anyway, right? We're not shipping JavaScript to the browser just like from our file system direct. There's always going to be layers, you know? So imagine if you're doing like a VTAP, for instance, then what you have is you've got your view like .view syntax. You can't put your .view up there anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's always going to be transpiled into something that's, and also minified, right? It's going to be turned into something that's quick to get into the user's browser. I don't know, we've been doing this stuff for years, and TypeScript doesn't add a new layer onto that. It's not like you have to run TypeScript first and then do that and then do that. TypeScript can just be compiled as part of the big ball of mud anyway. So what we get is TypeScript is just like an extra little bit of syntax that's just sprinkled onto our code that makes it more robust. And I think a lot of the reason I love TypeScript is that I know my users are going to get a better experience if I use TypeScript.
Okay.
Because, you know, like imagine if I get one of these things wrong, status, if I change this to a JavaScript file, this isn't going to yell at me, right? Status,
Yeah.
that looks absolutely fine, you know? And by the way, like you see how few kind of like annotations I had to add even to this code.
Mm-hmm.
TypeScript is just like giving me hints, even though, yeah, I don't know, it's just amazing. So hopefully
Yeah.
that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. And I have run into an issue like this where I mistyped like a property, and I didn't
Mm.
know until that code was run in production, and it was not really pleasant.
Yep.
So
Because
yeah,
if this is on a route that you don't hit very often, so my
exactly.
route I don't hit, and you just don't test this,
Yeah.
that feels so scary to me now, man. Like you wouldn't have that safety that TypeScript gives you. I feel like I can just like code drunk, you know, and just like hit random buttons, and TypeScript will
Mhm.
just show me the way. That's my feeling on TypeScript now.
Yeah.
Not that I'm drunk now. It's, you know,
No, no, no.
we're on the same time zone. It would be
Yeah, I know you're
pretty
not.
outrageous for me to be drunk.
I know you're not. So one other thing, um, with every tool, there's always the good use and the overuse. So can you overtype?
Yeah. So you can do things in TypeScript which people would consider like illegal for TypeScript.
Okay.
There is a keyword that I sort of forgot to mention earlier, which is any. Now, what I
Okay.
can do is I can have my function, or if I go back to this function here, I can say that A is any and B is any.
Okay.
What this means is any is a way of saying to your teacher, shut up, I know what I'm doing, leave me alone.
Um.
It's a way of skipping class, basically. What this does is it lets us pass any value into here. So 1 or like this or whatever. And the result is going to be typed as any2. Now, the issue with any is that as soon as you have one any, then your teacher stops checking all the way down the line. So anytime you see an any, like this means you're not going to get autocomplete, you're not going to get type checking, you're going to get nothing on it. So result is now any. Result stringified is now any. Second result is now any. Parse int, that does return a number actually still, but yeah, add two numbers, any. So
Yeah.
it just breaks everything all the way down the chain, which is really, really scary. But you can use any like in almost any position. So you can say, and in fact, TypeScript hates any so much by its default rule set that what we said, parameter A implicitly has an any type. It's saying, I don't know what this is, and so I've just put it as any. And if you hover over everything, it's going to be typed as any. So TypeScript considers this an error because it's so dangerous. So let's have our number, let's have another number here. And suddenly we get our errors again. So it's possible to use TypeScript wrong by just kind of like adding too much any to your code. And when you get to like advanced TypeScript, sometimes any is required because you know better than your teacher about some things. But especially when you're just starting out, any's are pretty dangerous, and in general, you probably shouldn't be using them. If you have a value that's genuinely unknown, you can actually pass in unknown here. Unknown. And this actually like makes TypeScript a bit confused because object is type unknown, so you don't know kind of what it is. But you can actually do some type narrowing here. So if type of A equals number and type of B equals number,
Mhm.
this isn't like clever TypeScript stuff. This is just standard JavaScript stuff.
Yeah.
It now knows that that's a number, and it knows that that's a number. And if I throw an error here, throw a new error, invalid call types or parameters, then it knows that it won't give me an error here. sure, because I can pass kind of anything to this, but it knows that it will return a number. So result is a number, result stringified is a string because to fixed is valid here. It's super cool. So I guess, yeah, there are ways of using TypeScript wrong, mostly around any, and you can kind of like, you can also like trample over TypeScript inference a bit much. So you can say like result, okay, this is going to be a number, so I'm just going to make sure it's a number. Result stringified, I'm going to make sure that's a string. Second result, I'm going to make sure that's a number. You can even add like this as keyword here, where you say as number, as string, or whatever, which sort of like double enforces everything. But actually, you can rely on TypeScript to just know what's going on pretty well. You know, like all of those annotations I just added didn't actually add anything because TypeScript knows that add to number. It knows that a plus b, because they're both numbers, they will return another number.
Nice.
There we
I'm
go.
liking TypeScript some more. Yeah.
Any more newbie questions? Anything that comes to your mind? Anything? Any doubts about TypeScript, or have I just fully convinced you?
I don't know. So the big change for me is to having to work in the .ts file. But fair enough, I do work in .vue file and I love the .vue files. So I don't know. Why is that even a problem, really?
Yeah, man.
Maybe it's a mindset thing. I don't know. Because
you don't want to throw away your JavaScript.
Yeah, from what I'm seeing, I am not throwing away my JavaScript. And fair enough, I'm not even shipping the JavaScript I write because it's going to go through minification and stuff. So that's pretty fair. So for developer happiness and to make sure I ship correct code, I should do my due diligence and start doing TypeScript. Okay, so
yeah, I think
yeah,
in terms of the industry, in terms of what people are looking for, I think that if someone is starting a new project now, and this is like if a company is starting a new project now, they're going to have a pretty good reason to not use TypeScript, or they're just going to use it. Because TypeScript just gives you so much. It gives you a lot of velocity because it knows that your errors are like it can tell you when you're wrong. You need to do a lot less unit testing as well, I find, because TypeScript it knows that your code is more robust, and it just means that like if someone's picking up the project, they can get helpful errors based on what's going on. And if someone needs to know what a user shape is, they can just reference the user interface. You know. It's almost like it gives you a bit more self-documentation without you having to write anymore, which is really cool. So I think that if you're a beginner and you want to consider, should I learn TypeScript? Yes, you'll move up to senior a lot quicker. You'll move up to mid a lot quicker. You'll get to lead a lot quicker. And if you can get really good at TypeScript, then you can turn into the TypeScript wizard in your organization and suddenly become indispensable. That's because TypeScript, it does have some pretty crazy errors that occur sometimes. And having someone who can understand the compiler at a deep level and understand what TypeScript is doing at all these points and why it's erroring in this way, that person is going to be very valuable to that organization because you're going to be able to unblock new beginners with TypeScript who might not know that stuff.
That's nice. So, one other opinion I had about TypeScript, this might be truly flawed as I think about it, but I think you might want to use TypeScript more with UIs if you have a choice than with backend JavaScript. Does that make sense? Because with UIs, you're shipping more user-facing code, and maybe your backend tooling already have a way of doing types and ensuring all those type safety checks. So, what do you think about that?
I mean, if you're using JavaScript in your backend, like you're going to have to be pretty sure that everything works. Like you're going to have a pretty good unit testing suite, which I pretty much always advocate. When I build a backend, I always make sure everything's pretty unit tested because it's relatively easy to test. But you've still got the same problems as you have in front end, which is you're using third-party libraries. If you're building like a Lambda function, you need to make sure that you're calling all the AWS Lambda stuff correctly. AWS Lambda has like a huge type definition library, so you can call the entire AWS SDK in a type-safe way. So yeah, I don't get that argument at all because yeah, like back-end code is just as important as front-end code,
True.
and you want it to be just as safe and you want the same experience too.
That is true. That is true. Yeah,
And also, if you're doing full stack stuff, sorry, one more thing,
Mhm.
which is you can actually have type safe stuff going over the wire as well. So like you can use something like TRPC or Remix or Next.js or Nuxt, I imagine also does this, and have like you don't need to worry about like what code is coming from your backend because your backend is type safe and your front end is type safe. So
Mhm.
you can just like pass stuff between them. It's absolutely amazing. You still obviously need to validate the entry point to your functions if they're public,
Mhm.
but the code that flows from your backend to your front end can be completely type safe,
That's
which
it.
is amazing, especially with like something like GraphQL too.
Yeah, I like it. I'm feeling like a TypeScript convert already.
My work here is done. Amazing.
Yes, yes. So I'm going to test the water because I did a rewrite of a code base of mine, so it's really
Mm,
fresh in Vue 3, and Vue 3 supports TypeScript immensely. So I'm
mm.
just going to work on the components, some of the components, and just try and integrate TypeScript. Just get the workflow. Yeah,
Sounds great. Yeah,
yeah.
you like in component driven architectures,
Mhm.
you can do all sorts of stuff. You can make sure that the props that you send to each component, I'm not sure if they're called props in Vue, but in
Yeah, yeah.
React, they're called props. Yeah, they are.
Mhm.
So the props are type safe, that everything you're getting from your global providers or your hooks or whatever they're called in Vue is type
Mhm.
safe. You just get so much uh, confidence.
Yeah, confidence. And we did that, right? So you sleep
Mm.
better at night. Like
Yep,
I've heard a lot of developers say TypeScript makes them sleep better at night. And
absolutely.
and they say to us JavaScript developers, like the vanilla JavaScript developers, how do you sleep at night without TypeScript?
I know.
And I can see why. I can see why. So we are at time, so we should be wrapping up now. So this is like a very sweet intro to TypeScript, and I believe I've learned enough to be productive. I can type my variables, I could make my own types and all that, and a bunch of stuff, even the .ts files. I've learned about those. So, what other resources could one from this point? Where do I go from here? That's sort of what I'm
Totally.
asking. Yeah.
I would say go to the official TypeScript documentation because it's really well written. There is a section called the handbook where you
Mm-hmm.
can start from. I've kind of covered like some bits of the handbook, but have left out others. There's loads of stuff that I didn't cover. So if you want to make like a type optional on an interface, you'd say like I don't know, phone number is a string like this. There's all this stuff here. There's a whole load
Wow.
of more complexity that I haven't covered as well.
Yeah.
There's so much.
Mm.
So yeah, like I hope that this has given you a good sense for what TypeScript is and the kind of things that you can do with it. But from here, go to the TypeScript handbook, and that will give you a complete sense of the other types of things that you can do in TypeScript. And like there's just sort of infinite combinations of the primitives that I've shown you here. So
Yeah.
go out, enjoy, and of course, when my course comes along, I'm actually I think I will have announced this by the time this goes out. I'm also doing a TypeScript workshop for advanced users, and so
Okay.
you can come to that workshop, which has about 30 seats, I think,
Oh.
and you can also
Okay.
take my course, which may be released by the time that you're watching this video too, which is called Total TypeScript, which will take you from nothing all the way to wizard level.
Nice. I think I should definitely take that course because I don't want to be anti-TypeScript no more. Let's have at it. Let's just do it.
Let's do it.
Let's
Yeah.
do it. Yeah. So
Nice.
any final words before we close off on this? Anything at all? Want to tell
I'm
us?
good, pal. Yeah, I think I'm okay. Um, yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's been really cool to meet you and be cool to be a part of this. So
Yeah.
go forth, have at it.
Yeah. And thank you so much for really doing this because I think I'm learning TypeScript from the best because as Wes Bos said, you should be the go-to guy for TypeScript. So that's like a very good validation. So where can we
Yeah.
find you online if anyone watching wanna get to you on
Sure.
anything contacts?
I'm on YouTube too. Maybe you can put
Mhm.
that in the video description.
I will.
I'm on Twitter at Matt Pocock UK.
Mhm.
And I'm on Twitch as well. I've started streaming on Twitch more at Matt Pocock UK too. So you can
Mm.
always ask me questions. And I've also got a Discord too, which you can
Wow.
I'll send Kevin the
Yeah.
link to.
Nice. Nice. Thank you. Thank you so much.
No worries.